The last aspect of the way in which this mass culture was going to now, there's essentially three main things that are going to change as the 20th century came into existence in regards to shopping and things like that. Okay, you're going to see essentially the birth of the shopping center, the department and chain store, and modern advertising the way that you and I understand it. Now, all of these things we totally understand and we grasp today. It is second nature, and we don't even put any kind of thought into it whatsoever. But at the turn of the century, life was very different. Now, as we've said throughout the last couple of chapters, you're seeing changes coming to society on a number of fronts. You're seeing technological, industrial, etc. Well, now we're going to see some of the benefits as a result of all these different changes that have happened in the everyday life of the American people. Okay, and we're going to start out talking about urban shopping. Okay, now remember, we talked about the fact that people were moving to the cities because that's where the jobs were. And as you have more people in a city, obviously there's going to be more things that they're going to need to purchase. And that's going to be everything from food to clothing to furniture to you name it, all of the above. And traditionally, you would have a general store in a town. This general store would literally sell a little bit of everything. And probably if they didn't have what you needed, it's something that could be ordered and it would arrive within a few weeks. But in the cities, you're going to start to see some major changes. You're going to see what are referred to as shopping centers. Now, we think about those, you know, all the time, or I should rephrase that, we use those all the time without thinking about them. You can go pretty much anywhere. You're going to have a shopping center. You'll probably have some places to buy food, say Subway or something like that. Probably a grocery store. A variety of different businesses will all be in one location. So instead of it being one store that covers just about everything, you'll have a number of different businesses close to one another that collectively would cover everything, but each one is going to be essentially unique. So you're going to have a concentrated area in a town that's going to have anywhere from, say a half dozen to, more of different shops that you can go to. You're going to be able to go and purchase your groceries at one, you'll be able to go get clothing at another, and you'll be able to get all of your shopping done in a central location. You're not going to have to go back and forth across town to get one thing here, one thing there. You're going to have a more concentrated area in which you can do all of your purchasing. Whatever you need, you're probably going to be able to find at the local shopping center. Now, like I said, we don't think much about these anymore. It's just the way businesses are set up today. But back at the turn of the 20th century, this was unique. This was something that people thoroughly enjoyed because it saved them time and effort. Today, we might complain about the parking, but back then, this was a true wonder of the day. Another thing that came about at this time is something known as the department store. Okay? Now, the department store is kind of like the old general store, but it's, to a much larger degree. Okay? Basically, you could find whatever you needed in this one building. It's sort of like a shopping center, but confined to one building. And each department store would have different departments. Those departments might include, housewares. That would be, pots and pans, things like that. You might have a department for furniture. You'd have a department for clothing. You'd have a department for, so on and so on and so on. The idea is it's a one-stop shop. You don't have to go to different places to buy things. You can do all your shopping at one particular store, get everything you need, pay just one time, and then you're on your way home. Now, the idea that you could find anything just about that you needed appealed to a lot of people. Most of us today, we don't like the idea of having to make multiple stops. We don't like having to go multiple places if we have to buy more than one thing. If we can go to one store that covers all of our needs, we're much happier with that, and we will probably shop there a little more often. Now, the first of these actually occurred in Chicago, a place called Marshall Field. This was the first department store in America, and it was, at that time, unique. Now, this is an idea that is going to be copied far and wide across the United States after people started to see how much money you could make by doing this. People liked the idea. The idea was everything you need under one roof. You didn't have to go to a multiple number of stores. Think about it. If we're talking about Chicago in this case, think about the weather that you can get in Chicago. Think about the cold and the snow and things like that. If you have to go in and out of stores, that's going to be a little uncomfortable. Now you don't have to worry about it. You have to face the weather, you go through the snow and the sleet and whatever in the wintertime. But once you're in the store, once you're in that department store, you didn't have to worry about anything after that. You didn't have to go back outside. You could get all of your shopping done in the comfort of the store itself. So it was this idea of comfort, of simplicity, of ease that appealed to the American people. And once other companies saw how beneficial this was to the bottom line, how much money they were going to make, they started to copy the idea. Soon you would have department stores across the country. But in all honesty, everything really started in Chicago with a place called Marshall Field. Another change that came at this time, in addition to the department store, is what's known as the chain store. Now, again, this is one of the things that we don't think twice about today. When you think of a chain store, you can think in terms of Walmart or Target or things along those lines. But there wasn't anything like this around the turn of the century. Each store throughout any town was owned by somebody local. It wasn't one corporation that had a store in each individual town. The chain store was going to change that. Chain stores were groups of stores that were owned by the same person. Now today we would say they were owned by the same corporation or the same company. But back then you would have essentially a whole bunch of stores owned by one person or one family. And part of the appeal to all of this was the fact that you could be in a different town. Maybe you were on vacation or you were visiting family or something along those lines. And they might have the exact same store that you were used to back in your hometown. Think about it today. If you go somewhere on vacation, you decide you're going to go to Target to get something, the store may be laid out somewhat differently, but you still know the essential products that you're going to be able to get there. Same thing could be true of a Walmart or a Costco or anything along those lines. So the idea behind this was essentially you're going to, again, build customer loyalty or brand loyalty. You're going to get people to start shopping at your particular store, and then when they're somewhere else, they're going to keep shopping at that particular store. Now, these really got started in the late 1800s. It would start off, regionally, of course, some nearby towns or something like that. And then as time progressed, as the business was doing better and better, they would continue to expand. Best example I could use for today would be something like, say, Walmart, for example. Walmart started off as one store. It started to grow regionally in the South, and now is essentially you can find a Walmart in pretty much every town in the country, it seems. But it all started in the late 1800s. Remember, this is when you're seeing this mass culture start to come into existence, and this is a response to that. This is a response to providing the goods that individuals actually wanted to purchase. Now, one of the early ones was called F.W. Woolworth's Five and Dime store. Now they called it a five and dime store because it was sort of, you can think of it as the dollar store of that time frame. Okay, a lot of the items were 5 and 10 cents. Okay, it wasn't a high-end store. It wasn't very, very expensive items. You could get quite a bit of stuff there. A lot of the Woolworths also featured a lunch counter, so think about a food court, that kind of thing. You're going to see Woolworths as really one of the early innovators and one of the early adapters to go through and create this new form of chain store. You're also going to start to see grocery stores, chain grocery stores start to become popular. One of the older ones that still is in existence today is a company called Kroger's. We don't really have any out here on the West Coast that I'm aware of, but you go back east, there's quite a few of them. So again, you could look at Save Mart or Safeway or any of the stores in which you have chains here in California, that you're setting things up so that people who shop at that store at home, when they're somewhere else, they know what to expect from that particular store. What all these different chain stores did, they offered consumers brand names and low-cost sales. So they were, again, trying to build up a consumer base. They were trying to make sure that they got people into the stores, that they started purchasing things at that particular store, and as such would become loyal customers for years and years and years. There is still a lot of that to this very day. You have a great number of people who will only shop at a particular grocery store or something along those lines. And so the basis on which they were building all this really panned out. It really worked out well for them. We now have different types of chain stores all throughout the nation, and some of them have done phenomenally well, some of them have come and gone. It just all depends. And some of them have been able to adapt to changing economic situations. Others have had trouble adapting, and they've, as the saying goes, gone the way of the dinosaur. Now, you can't really sell a lot of stuff without advertising, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, we as a society have to be told why we need to buy a particular item, how it's going to make our lives so much better and change the course of history or something along those lines. And you watch TV, you can see who they think is watching a show because of what products they're advertising on that show. But you got to understand, with this growth in shopping came a growth in advertising. Now, there had been ads before. We have always had advertising. It's just becoming much more streamlined and much more expansive and showy at this point. You're going to see companies of all sorts going through doing whatever they can to convince you that their item, their fill in the blank, whatever it is the greatest thing that has ever existed in the history of humanity, and therefore you've got to buy one if you want to be happy and have a good life. Companies filled magazines and newspapers with ads for their products. Everywhere you looked, you would see something advertising a particular product. And this was a point in time when there were much fewer restrictions on advertising. We have a lot of laws about advertising today, but at that period in time, it was almost a safe bet to say you could say whatever the heck you felt like about your product, and there wasn't a lot, that would happen to you if you weren't 100% truthful. So you're going to see all sorts of advertising. You pick up a magazine, and that's the same as true today. You look through any magazine, you're going to see ads for various things. You open a newspaper, you're going to see ads for various products. And this started really in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it has continued straight through. Think about even to the point of the internet today. Think about the various ads that pop up as you're watching YouTube or some other, you're on some other website. You'll have these various pop-up ads that will try and sell you, whatever. So advertising really is coming of age at this point. Now, I said that you could go through and quite literally everywhere you turned, you would see some form of advertising. So it wasn't just magazines and newspapers, okay? Remember, this is a time frame long before radio or television, so there wasn't any advertising like that. But you would also find advertising on barns, on houses. Billboards started to come of age at this point in time. Now, we've all seen billboards as we drive up and down a freeway, but this was something new. And so they would go through, and they would have large advertisements there for people to see. Now, that was a point in time before cars, obviously, but you could see them posted inside towns, inside large cities and whatnot. They would put up billboards on buildings and whatnot for people to see. Out in the country, people allowed their barns to be painted with advertisements, for money. And as a result, literally everywhere you turned, it didn't matter if you were in the city reading a magazine or if you were out in the country, on a bike ride down a country lane, you might run into some form of advertising. And all this advertising had one goal in mind. That goal was to get some of your money to buy their product, whatever that product happened to be, because you simply could not live without it. Now, the last bit that we're going to look at in regards to all this is going to be catalogs and what's called RFD, which is short for Rural Free Delivery, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Now, today we all have a really good understanding of how to use Amazon. Most of us, if not all of us, at one point or another have ordered something online to have it sent to our homes. And while the use of the computer to do this is relatively new, this whole theory of buying something from somewhere else and having it sent to you has really been around since the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, you had Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck, two different companies, introduced mail order catalogs. You could quite literally buy anything via mail order at this time. And when I say anything, I mean that, from seeds to firearms to houses, believe it or not. You would get, each year they would release a new catalog. It would have drawings or pictures of all the various items that were for sale, and you could go through and look through that catalog and decide what items in there were things that you just could not survive if you didn't have. These books literally brought department store items to those who lived outside of the cities. Now remember, the department stores, you're going to find those more in the urban areas. You're not really going to find a department store in a small town somewhere out in a rural area. But now you have the ability to shop the same way that somebody would in regards to a department store, except you're doing it from the comfort of your own home. It was quite literally the Amazon or eBay of its day. You could go through and find anything in these catalogs just about. You could go through and you could order what you wanted when you wanted. They had the price there. It would be delivered, and voila, whatever that item was, you now had access to it. You could purchase, whatever you needed, or even whatever you wanted. It wasn't just about buying the necessities of life, but it was about buying the things that were going to make your life better. Now, each of these catalogs, and both companies had their own catalogs, each company's catalog contained a detailed description of the goods that were available. A lot of them, like I said, also included a drawing of the item or possibly a picture, but more likely a drawing. And the thing is, you could go through. It was just like using a search engine, except you had to flip pages. You could go through and you could look at absolutely everything. These were relatively thick books, and they contained all sorts of wonders, all sorts of gadgets, all sorts of things that they just knew were going to make your life better. And in some cases, they were selling the necessities. Maybe, like I said, maybe it was seeds. Maybe it was clothing. Or maybe it was just, something for entertainment. You could buy books. You could buy, as time progressed, records and things along those lines, phonographs. But the way it worked was that each one of these companies mailed its catalogs to farmers and small town residents. You then had that option of going through, looking through the catalog, and picking out what you wanted to buy. And sometimes neighbors would share it. This would be a popular thing for families to look through. Everybody could look through it at different times and decide what it was they wanted. And as long as you had the money to pay for it, then you could order it. Now, when I said it was literally everything, I'm not kidding. You used to be able to buy rifles and pistols through the catalogs like that. There were even entire houses you could buy, and it was a DIY project on the house. Quite literally, you could purchase it, and they sent you all the lumber, all the materials, everything necessary, plus instructions on how to put it together. Now, as you guys know, I live in Turlock, and there is still one of those houses standing in Turlock that somebody had purchased. They sent all the necessary items via the train. The person got them to the lot where they were going to build, and there is a house standing to this very day. So it was quite literally everything imaginable just about was in those catalogs. And this fueled people's imaginations for not only the things they needed, but the things they wanted, the things that they felt would make their life better, the things that they felt would give them a little more joy in life. Today we would think of it in terms of window shopping. Or as many of us do, we'll scroll through Amazon at different times and look at the things that we would like to purchase. We may not have the ability to get them right now, but it is something that makes us think. In fact, it was with these catalogs. By about 1910, you had somewhere in the range of 10 million Americans shopping by mail. You would order it from the Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward catalog. You'd send your payment off. they would send the item back via the U.S. mail. Now, the only problem with that was if you lived out in the country somewhere. Now, today we are quite used to the fact that the mail comes to wherever our home is. At this point in time, mail came to essentially the town, and that was going to be about it. If you lived out on a farm, if you lived somewhere out in the country, you had to make sure that when the mail came in, you went and picked it up, usually at a general store or post office. So every time you went into town for whatever, you always checked the mail. It wasn't like going to the mailbox, at the end of your driveway and seeing what was there. You had to make a conscious effort to go into town in order to get whatever the item or the letter was. And so the post office actually helped increase the mail order business when they started something called Rural Free Delivery, or RFD. For the first time, the post office was going to deliver to everybody's home, even if you did live out in the country. Instead of you having to come all the way into town to pick up whatever the item was, it could now be brought directly to your home. As a result, more people living out in the country bought more items because now it could be, essentially delivered to you. RFD was, really a way that helped the people and the businesses at the same time, because now you could purchase anything you wanted and it would be delivered right to your door. Again, best example for today would be something like Amazon. Rural free delivery meant that packages arrived directly to your home. We take that for granted today. We don't think twice if FedEx or Amazon or any other delivery service brings something to our house. But back then, at the turn of the century, this was a game changer. The various businesses saw this, and they increased their advertising to encourage those living out in the country to purchase things, because now, like I said, it could come right to your door. You didn't have to make a special trip. All those wonders from all over the world, all those things that you could now buy that, your life was just incomplete without, could now arrive at your home, and you could make the decision as to whether or not it fulfilled your life's wish or not.